Hello, hello, and welcome to episode number 124 of Window Treatment Friday Live. I am joined by my friend and colleague, Kimberly. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Vida. How are you? For those of you who are new, I am Kimberly. I am one of the partners here at WindowWorks, and we are located in Livingston, New Jersey.
Hmm. And my name is Vita Vygovska, and I'm the owner of Vitalia Inc., a window treatment company located in the Philadelphia area. And every Friday, if you're not familiar with Window Treatment Friday Live, this is when every Friday morning, Kim and I come on here live on Instagram, Facebook, and other platforms and chat about a window treatment topic. And today, that topic is two-story windows. And so, without further
Yes.
ado, here is one of Kim's projects.
All right. So, this is a project that we just completed about a month or so ago for Jennifer Aceto for Designs by Dama. And this was a project that the client had this great room with two-story high windows, and at first she wasn't really sure how high she wanted to go with the drape. She was just thinking covering the um, bottom level, and I thought, no, let's go, up, 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 because if you are new to Window Treatment Friday Live, um, Vita and I, if we have the opportunity to go as high as we go or up, up as we say, that's where we're going to take it. So we really love the way that this came out. What we opted to go with here is the client really loved the look of a French return rod,
Hmm.
but she didn't want any type of rings.
Oh,
We did
interesting.
this entire house with decorative traversing rods.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when it came to the great room, she's always wanted French return rods, but did not like the look of rings. Did not. She just said, "I want the drape as tight as possible to the rod." So we went to my go-to,
Hmm.
Helzer Brothers, and we used their decorative traversing French return rod, and we installed the drape just a couple inches shy from the crown molding. These panels are stationary, so what you're seeing here is you're seeing a set of single windows on either side of the fireplace. So this is one viewpoint here, and then the next one is on the other side of the room. We had a bank of three windows side by side on the upper and lower level, and we did another set of stationary panels there. And
Hmm.
for this, because of the proportion, this is where we played with proportions a little bit.
Hmm.
With the windows next to the fireplace, so let's go back here. These
Hmm.
were just single width panels
Okay.
because again, the windows weren't that wide. We didn't have that much space between the window molding on the fireplace and going into the corner. So we didn't want to feel like the window was a little too overdressed,
Hmm.
which when you're dealing with single windows, sometimes that could be the case. But then with the larger window over here, because it's such
Hmm.
a large expanse,
Yep.
we decided to do each panel at two widths. And so this is a good example of you're allowed to mix and match how
Hmm.
many widths per window or per treatment in the same room. I know a lot of times I get asked, and I don't know about you, Vita, like,
Yep.
is it going to look silly where if one looks a little fuller than the other? And I always say it also has to do a lot with the window conditions because you wouldn't want something super narrow on such a wide rod and such grandiose windows. And you don't want something, I mean, two widths per panel on those single windows would have been a little bit of overkill. So,
And I just thought about, I mean, it's like asking a builder or an architect, will it be too weird to have a single window next to the bank of these wide windows?
right,
Well, no, sir, it does not look silly at all. It looks
exactly.
beautiful. And so, just like the windows look proportionate, rather, just like the windows create the proportion next to each other, we have to follow those proportions with the way we're treating them with the fabric.
Yep. And another cool key tip here is because of how wide the rod was in order to
Mhm.
ship, I actually gave Helzer Brothers like my cut sizes because I
Mm,
knew I didn't really want that center bracket there. So I had the
mhm.
brackets, I measured it so that the brackets lined up with the division of the windows.
Yep.
And so then that way that all could be there. And I think it really turned out great. The client most importantly, was super happy with the outcome and was so happy that she decided to bring the window treatments up right under the crown.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. So the
Sure.
wide rod, that's three pieces. That's not one
Hmm.
single piece.
No, no,
Hmm.
because it was about I want to say it was over 160 inches wide.
Yeah.
So
And so to ship something like that, you have to go via truck, and anytime you go via truck, it just costs you a lot of money.
well, not only that, but think about it. At 160 inches wide, fine, it comes via truck. How are you transporting it to the job site? How are you
Hmm.
getting it in the house without potentially knocking everything over? There's a
Hmm.
lot of different things that could happen when you're dealing with these wider widths.
Hmm.
So that's when I decided, I said, okay, I don't want to just splice it right down the middle.
Hmm.
Let me cut it in three so when they're working up that high, because these window treatments were about it was about 100 or 220 inches off the ground. So um, I wanted it to be as easy as possible to install for
Yeah.
Billy and Dennis, who did this installation. So this was a
Hmm.
two-man installation because A, it was French return, and B, because of the height.
Right. So, question, if I go back
Hmm.
to the previous slide, I really like how you aligned the positioning of the brackets between the windows versus
Hmm.
anywhere kind of willy, what's the
Yeah.
word go? Willy
Willy
wally,
nilly.
willy
Yeah.
nilly, not willy wally,
Yeah.
willy nilly. So that was really, really good and smart and intentional. So that's pretty awesome. Oops, my question though is if I were to go back for
To
the
the first one.
smaller window, what was the thinking behind having the center bracket there?
The weight. The weight of the drape, because if I know Billy, these drapes were pretty heavy because they were a linen fabric that
Mm-hmm.
we lined. We did it with the combination lining of where it's a um, like a interlining of felt on the inside, and then on the outside closer to the window or out the outer part of the drape, it's just like your standard cotton lining. So with the weight of how the length and the weight of this, Billy just felt that let's just put a center bracket here just to keep it stable. So that's what it is. If you see a center bracket in a situation like that, it's because he just doesn't want to get that lovely phone call a couple months from now to be like, "Hey, my drapes fell 19 feet from the air."
I hear you. I hear you. Not great. And being
No.
that these are linen drapes, how did you treat the length? Are they off the floor, breaking on the floor?
So
What's
they
your
were they
thinking there?
were again, this was a very long discussion with the client. They're just off the floor because we know that they are going to grow and shrink.
Hmm.
So we did have that conversation at nauseum about this. So yeah, so what was nice is it's a little bit more of a stable linen,
Mm.
because not all linens are the same, and it wasn't 100% linen. It was a
Oh,
linen
good.
combo. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
No, no, no. I would not have done that to myself or
Hmm.
anybody involved in the
Hmm.
process of going 100% linen on 19-foot long drapes. No,
Hmm.
no way.
Hmm. And so when you calculated the length, and you deducted the bracket deduction, and what kind of clearance did you deduct from the bottom? Like where did you want the drapes to ultimately hang versus how short or how long you made them? Do you
So
remember?
what I so what I did here was, because we weren't hugging the crown and we weren't so tight, I did that on purpose. So
Hmm.
this way I can give myself a little play, because in this way Billy can see on site how springy is this fabric going to be, how much do we
Hmm.
think it's going to stretch, because again,
Hmm.
it's fabric. So by doing that and giving us a little bit of room to play and not really um choking, like we like to say, going right under the crown.
Yeah.
And I decided, all right, I'm going to drop it maybe like 3 or 4 inches from the bottom of the crown, that
Hmm.
if he starts to see when he's putting this up, oh, this is really going to grow, I have space to move the rod up. He'll put
Okay.
one up and kind of play with it a little bit. Yeah, so
Uh-huh.
I gave myself a little bit of room, especially when you're going up that high. You don't have to necessarily be so tight to the crown.
Hmm.
So, because visually from the bottom, it's going to look like it's sitting right underneath the
Hmm.
crown. So
Hmm.
that's where we are a little lucky and I say that loosely
Yes,
when
I
you're
know.
going to on a two-story install like this, because it's not the crown isn't necessarily at eye level.
Mhm,
Um, so yeah, that's what we did there, and he puts one up, see how it's gonna behave, and
mhm.
then if he feels like it's gonna stretch a little bit too much, then we have, a couple inches of play. Something isn't gonna grow or shrink like that, like 3 or 4 inches on site,
Mhm,
so
mhm. And when
yeah.
you had the conversations with the customer, did you what kind of, flexibility did you give yourself? Did you say that it was going to grow by 2 inches, 3 inches? It may end up on the floor on some summer nights by an inch or 2. Like, what sort of leeway did you give yourself and
Because
expectations set with the
yeah,
customer?
because this wasn't a full-on 100% linen, I said, "Look, we're gonna make it so that it's just like a half inch off the floor.
Mhm.
There will be times where it might be touching the floor when it's humid." And I said, I don't have a crystal ball,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and I don't know how much this is potentially gonna go onto the ground. So,
Mhm.
especially, like, when we're dealing with 100% linen, that is one of the things that I strongly say,
Mhm.
especially if it's something that it's this long. Listen, this is gonna grow, this is gonna shrink. I have no idea what it's gonna do. Gravity is gonna take control, and gravity is really gonna be, the gravity and the humidity are
Yep.
really gonna be the boss when it comes to something at 19 feet at 100% linen. It could be on the floor 2 inches one day, and then
Mhm.
just off the floor half an inch where we left it. So that's always something that when I'm dealing with 100% linen and I'm looking at the actual sample and seeing how springy the fabric is and kind of manipulating the sample, I'll say that. But in this case, this fabric was a little bit more stable again because it was a linen cotton poly type of
Mhm.
blend. So
Mhm.
I knew that there would be some movement, but it wouldn't be a crazy amount of movement.
Mhm. So she was okay with potentially having these drapes on the floor by an inch or 2?
Not by an inch, or maybe just on the floor about an inch. So we'll
Mhm.
see. We put them up in the winter time or just now in the fall. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens in this. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. We have no idea. Something could
That's
live in
right.
someone's house for a year and then all of a sudden grow. We've had that twice this year that we installed
So
something
have
in
we.
January. Yeah, we installed something in January and that fabric is 100% linen.
Mm.
And the floors were so off in that room that the drapes we already knew that going in, so the drapes were already made
Mhm.
tailored to the floor and
Mhm.
hung tailored to the floor. And then we had like a really hot day in May,
Mhm.
and we got an email from the designer like that Tuesday, like, "Hey, her drapes are on the floor." And I was like, "Hey, they grew because of the humidity." And we went there and we looked at them, and I said, "Look, this was because it was hot."
Oh,
And
yeah.
then a couple days later, they came up a little bit. So now what we're doing is, I said, let's see what they do. Like, do if they go back up to where they were when we installed them in January, the January of 2022 and January of 2023. I say we just have to leave them and know
Mhm.
that this is what's going to happen. That they're going
Yeah.
to be on the floor a little bit on hot days, and then they're going to come up. Because if we go ahead and cut them
Mhm.
now, what's gonna happen in January when it's cold? In
That's
February,
right.
March? Then you're gonna have high waters. You know what
So
I mean?
it's a really big deal in our industry right
Yeah,
now, I feel. We are dealing
yeah,
with the same situation. And we have really learned to be very, very assertive and specific with our customers, letting them know that we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And you have to be okay. If you want drapery panels and if you want the linen blend, even forget about the 100% linen, that's a definite. But even with the
right.
blend, there will be some variation in length. And no, Mrs. Customer, I don't know whether it's going to grow by an inch or 2 inches or sometimes even 3 inches. So you're just going to have to be okay with it.
Yeah, and then that's the thing. We don't know. And as much as like we're not trying to be flippant about it or funny about it, like that's just our reality is that
Right.
we're not sure. I mean, we had drapes here in at Window Works, an embroidered drape from Kravet, fabric from
Mhm.
Kravet that we had on display for, I don't know, 8 years or whatever. And there were times that it would be on the floor, and then in the wintertime it would be up off of the floor and it had a
Yeah.
sheer behind it that would not grow. So, but we purposely left it here so that customers could see, like, this is what happens, you know?
Mhm,
So,
mhm, yeah.
alrighty, quick commercial break. If you are new to window treatments, whether you are an interior designer who's just starting to source window treatments for your projects, or you're a homeowner that is thinking about redoing the window treatments in their home, head on over to windowworksnj.com. Luann wrote a free ebook, Architectural Digest Isn't Coming: 10 Things You Need to Know About Custom Window Treatments. It's a window treatment 101 guide, if you will, and it really breaks down the different topics of window treatments.
All right. Now, this next project is one that Vitalia Inc. has done last year. This was in Center City, Philadelphia. It was a wonderful client from a customer, I mean, from a designer,
Mhm.
Christina Hank. Her firm is Hank Design. And we did, this is a family room, open concept from
Ooh,
the
nice.
um, this is the view from the kitchen. So just like where the photographer would be standing is directly in the kitchen. And there are actually four sets of windows on each, well, two sets on each side, I should say. So
Hmm.
eight altogether. So this is another view, and this is yet another view, and this is yet another view, actually more than eight. So
Hmm.
there's a ton of windows in
Yeah.
this in this house. And just like what you said earlier, Kim, whenever you have a two-story window, it really, really, really behooves you to take your drape all the way up to create the drama and the whole effect. If you were to put anything above the lowercase windows, it would just like really cut off this amazing family room and
Right.
the grandeur of the room. So we always, always, always recommend that we go up, up, up in the
Hmm.
two-story rooms. Now, here you can see that maybe, or maybe not, these were actually mounted on ceiling mounted Architrack rods. So your
Hmm.
very basic Kirsch, those wide commercial looking Architrack rods. Now I'm finding that some designers are really liking these rods if we go all the way up into the ceiling, because
Right.
it just kind of blends in with the ceiling and you can't really see it, which is great from the design standpoint. However, from the installation standpoint, this is a real challenge, especially when you're dealing with ripple fold. Anyone who's ever done any kind of ripple fold drape, if you're a window treatment pro listening to us, you know that you have no flexibility on the length.
No,
It is like
none.
doing an inside mount cornice.
Yeah.
Your length is what it is, or your width is what it is in the cornice instance. There's no pins to move it up and down. There's no give by a quarter of an inch or a half an inch. Those snaps are snapping in exactly where they're supposed to
Hmm.
be, and the drape falls exactly where it just kind of falls at the bottom. Now, thankfully, these were poly uh, drapes, poly fabric. There was no linen in these fabrics whatsoever, because they were very, very specific about wanting these drapes off the floor. So,
Mm.
whew, dodged that one.
So, all right. Talk to us about the process of just doing the outer side of the windows versus doing the outer side and then adding maybe like another stationary panel in the center area there.
Yeah. So the space, I'm not sure if it looks big in the picture for someone who hasn't been in the space, but the
It
space,
does look big.
it looks big. In
Yeah.
reality, it's not big at all, actually.
Okay.
It's a brownstone in Center City, Philadelphia. So there's a lot of floors. It's a very vertical building, but
Mhm.
each floor is actually not very big per se. And
Okay.
so this room, I think the lens, the photography, even though it's not skewed at all necessarily, but it still made it kind of expansive looking. But in reality, it's a somewhat of a tight space. And also, what you're not seeing on the left hand side off of this picture is a pretty amazing grand kitchen too. But the kitchen, which you can see, actually has standard ceiling. So it's only the
Yeah.
family room that has that high elevated ceiling.
Higher.
So all that to say, what I'm driving at is if we were to add too much drapery, it just really would have overcrowded this room. It would have been way too much fabric and too much grandeur. I mean, I'm all
Yeah.
about height and drama and grandeur when we need it, but if we don't, let's not, what is it called? Gild the lily.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then another thing, like this is a weird window configuration. It's not like
Yeah.
in the
It's
house
dumb.
that you just showed, which is
Mm.
pretty standard. You have your fireplace in the middle, and then you have the four windows kind of flanking it. This is weird because it's an older historic home that was completely renovated. So you have like these two windows on this side, and then off on the other side you have like a set of four windows, and then on the opposite wall, the
It's the opposite.
vantage point from which this picture is taken, it's the opposite. So it's just like it's really bizarre. So like to put a panel in the middle there, like do you put it towards the singular windows or do you put it towards the double windows? It just very weird. So we just went for something that made the most sense and was simple enough for everybody's brains to absorb. So
Now,
very, very
are
cool project.
are both panels, the ones that are near the single windows versus the one that are, we'll call it a double, for argument's sake, are they all the same width
They
across
are.
the board?
Yep, they're
Okay,
all
yeah,
the
that's what it
same
looked like.
width, and I believe they were single width. Now, unlike pleated drapes that pleat down to like 19, 20 inches or
Hmm.
so at 2 times fullness for single width, with ripple fold, we have to make sure that we do get the nice amount of stack there.
Yeah,
And so this is what a single width looks like stacked in a
yeah,
100% fullness and ripple fold.
yeah. And the pleats aren't stacked. You have space between the pleats, so it's not like the pleats are touching or anything like that. So I know when we're doing stationary ripple fold panels, there's always that conversation of like, how wide do we want to make them? What do you want the pleats to do at the top? Do you want the pleats to touch at the top? Do you want space
Hmm.
between the pleats? Because if you want space between the pleats, that's one size. If you want the pleats to touch, then that's another size.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's,
It's a lot of
because on,
conversations.
yeah, because especially with ripple folds, if you're dealing with, say, like a 36-inch panel and you want the pleats to touch, then that's gonna stack down to, like, 15 inches, and it's gonna look really small.
That is true.
So, yeah, so it's all those kinds of conversations of what do you want it to look like? Let's start there
I know.
and then work our way
And then
backward.
reverse engineer it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys, a quick commercial break. I wanted to let you know that we have a special free gift for anyone who is new to the Vitalia Inc. website and the Vitalia Inc. world. It is a curated lookbook filled with inspiration and education, and we call it 37 and a half window treatment ideas for you to steal, swipe, and use immediately on your next design project. You can grab your own free, immediately downloadable copy at vitaliainc.com.
Very nice. Okay, this is a project that we did here at WindowWorks. This project is, I want to say, probably about 11 years old. So when we did this project, this was for Diane Gelman. She was a designer here local in our area. She has now since retired out of the interior design world and has moved. But
Mhm.
when we did this project for her, this is one of the first projects that we did, and she was working with another window treatment company. And what they had did here was these drapes were already installed, and they only did the drapes on the outer side of the fireplace, on the outer side of the wall. So they did one single panel.
Mhm.
And as the room was, as they were adding furniture into the room and whatnot, they just felt like there was something missing without that secondary panel that went
Mhm.
in on near the fireplace.
Mhm.
So that was our challenge, was to go in and then like kind of help them figure out how can we make this match the other workroom, how but because and they asked us, they said, do you think we should have done it as a pair versus
Mhm.
one single panel? And because there's so much wall space, we're like, we do think adding that other panel will make this view, because it's the first thing you see when you walk into this townhome.
Mhm.
It's
Oh,
gonna
it's a
just make the
townhome,
view.
wow.
Yeah, this is a townhouse, yeah. So, it's just gonna make this view feel that much more grand. Now, we didn't
Mhm,
do anything on the side windows, we just kind of ignored those because they had their shades that they needed for privacy, but this was
mhm.
really, like, the money shot. Like, I took this picture actually, and I yeah, I sat on the floor in the foyer in
Yeah,
order to get this really pretty shot, and
yeah, it
as
just
soon
went up
as,
like that.
yeah, as soon as Billy put up the panels on the side of the fireplace, I was like, "No, this is exactly what this needed." So, it goes to show you that sometimes I always say a lot of times, because we will have these conversations with clients where they are a little shy about, like,
Yep.
"I don't wanna feel like I'm overdressing the window." And then we say, "Look, we
Mhm,
could always start with just putting 1 panel, do a single panel on the outer side, put it
mhm,
up, and live with it and see what it looks like. And then if you feel
mhm.
like, oh, I need to add another panel, we could always add it,
Yeah,
you
and I
know?
see that you
So,
have a really big break there on the floor, almost a puddle. How was
yes.
that conversation?
Well, that was, again, this is how you can tell how old this was.
Yes.
Um, the client really wanted the puddle, so that's why it's there. But what we did here was, in order, because of now these drapes had been hung for quite some time. They were hung for maybe about 6 months before we came in and did the other panels.
Mhm,
So it became like, well, the dye lots aren't going to match. How are we going to do this? Like, all that conversation. So what we
mhm.
did was, we took the panel that was on the right-hand side, the single panel, and just put it with the panel on the left and made
Ah,
that its
oh,
own pair, and then we created
okay.
a completely new pair, for the right side window. So that this way, it just kind of, like, those fabrics would match dye law and everything else. So that was kind of our workaround. Not that,
Yeah.
and we got a bunch of CFAs, and I went there to match it to make sure that, like, it looked okay. But there was that, like, what are we gonna do? We're like, we'll just put the two panels that have been living here together, and then
Yeah.
we'll make a brand new set. And then finding the rings that match the hardware, that was a whole nother ordeal too.
I'm
But
sure it was. My goodness. My goodness.
Alrighty, so another quick commercial break. If you are just joining us for the first time, Window Treatment Friday started, or live, excuse me, Window Treatment Friday live started from Luann and Vita's episodes on Luann's podcast, The Well Designed Business, WTF. It was part of Luann's Power Talk Friday series, where Luann and Vita would discuss all things window treatments from a business point of view. And then Vita and I decided about 2.5 years ago to start the live version, so we could give you images and talk about, the prettier side of the window treatment industry.
Mhm.
And if one podcast wasn't enough for Miss Luann, she has a second podcast that Vita will tell you about.
Yes, in the second podcast called Window Treatment for Profit, it is directed specifically at window treatment professionals and discusses the business side of window treatments. But on that one, I'm an honor of being a recurring guest host. Every Thursday, I come into your inbox with a small, short, but mighty tip on how to run a better, more profitable, more productive, easier window treatment business. We call it Vita's Tip in 10, and I would love for you to tune in on whichever platform you listen to your podcasts. All right, guys, and this is a project that we did a few years ago. It was a phenomenal house. We actually did window treatments for the entire house, but really the biggest impact is this family room. Much like your townhome, Kim, this was just off of the front foyer, and this is the first thing that you could see coming into the house. We used the blocking technique here, and specifically three-part blocking. So you can see we used three different fabrics. You can also please note that each fabric is seamed together at a particular spot where it aligns with window molding. So it's not the what is it, the willy-nilly, not the wally
Yeah.
nilly
Will
wally, willy
will
wally.
willy-nilly just spot wherever you're going to put it, exactly.
Yep, so we wanted to be very intentional about that, and we aligned it with the molding in the windows. And we did treat all sets of the windows versus just the ones that are flanking the fireplace, because this was such a huge space. I mean, this was
Yeah.
a huge house, huge ceilings, huge everything about it. So this space, even though I think in this particular picture it may not even show it as much as my other one showed, that space might have looked pretty big, whereas in reality it was pretty small. This looks kind of nice and compact, but in reality it's a huge space. So having all these panels here actually was not overkill. But another reason that it wasn't an overkill, and this is a question that I get asked a lot when I show this picture, is we only used a single width of fabric
Hmm.
for each drapery panel. The space between the window and the fireplace, that inside space, was teeny, 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 teeny. There wasn't just a lot of space to put a drapery panel. So one width
Yeah.
of fabric was it. Otherwise, we would have encroached onto the window by just way, way, way too much. So that's how it turned out. I'm happy and proud to say that it won a first place in the Window Fashion InVision competition this past year or 2 years ago. I don't remember now. A couple of years ago, I think. So and even ended up on the cover of the magazine. So that was fun. So this was
Yay.
one of our sort of iconic projects that we're really, really happy and very proud of.
Yeah, and I was just going to say to you, Vita, this is a perfect example of the project that you showed with, you know, on the in Philly over there in the historical brownstone. You just did one, one panel kind of framing out the entire sets of windows. And now here's
Hmm.
another example of putting pairs of panels
Hmm.
on every single window. Even the picture that I just showed beforehand, that one was a very similar setup to this one, where
Hmm.
you have the fireplace. I mean, the fireplace isn't as pretty, but that you have the set of windows there, and then the other set of windows on the sides where here we just said we're just going to focus on the windows next
Hmm.
to the fireplace and ignore the sides. Now, what Vita's showing you is another example of what it looks like to dress all four.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
And so you have
there's,
to decide, you guys,
yeah,
depending on the vastness of the space, whether you think it can handle more panels versus fewer panels.
exactly. So, and alrighty, everyone. Well, that concludes today's episode of Two Story Windows. We hope you picked up some nuggets for your next project. If you are located in the New Jersey or New York area, or if you're an interior designer that has a project in this area and you just don't know where to start when it comes to two-story windows, how high, how many widths, all the things, what kind of rod, give us a call here at WindowWorks or follow us at WindowWorks on Instagram and Facebook. We would be happy to help you with your next two-story window project.
And if you're located in the Philadelphia area, then we are your partner in executing your window treatment projects. We are a one-stop shop, your go-to resource, a VIP treatment, concierge level company exclusively for luxury interior designers ready to fly first class in the world of window treatments. So we would love to hear from you if you need help with either two-story windows or any kind of window treatment project.
Alrighty. Well, we hope you have a great weekend and we will see you next Friday.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.